Hunting Monsters. Written by Craig Hamilton. Narrated by Shaman Casey.
Only a monster could have left such carnage. I stood in the doorway of a tiny apartment, the stench of decomposition wafting out to fill the dimly lit hallway. The deputy who had opened the door had already fled down the corridor before retching and emptying his stomach. I ignored the officer, just as I ignored his partner, who glared at me as I took in the scene inside the room. His skepticism affected me as much as the smell. Not at all. The cops may not have known me, but death was no stranger. Nearly 2/3 of humanity had died 10 months ago, the day the system came online and ended the world as we knew it. Monsters spawned everywhere and massacred mankind as our lives became governed by the system's video game-like rules. Rules that allow no replays or extra lives. Those of us remaining had seen plenty of death, but I may have seen more than most. That fateful day began as I pursued a man who had skipped out on his bail. When the man unexpectedly opened fire and fled, I had refused to let the criminal get away, even as our world changed. The pursuit and ensuing gunfight led to my first experience gained under the system. Before I even had a chance to select a class, I had earned a level from killing another human. The system rewarded that achievement with an advanced class that matched my actions, and I have been hunting monsters ever since. I stepped cautiously into the hotel room-turned apartment. There was no avoiding the dried blood that stained the floor a rusty red, but I kept my feet away from the larger lumps. Crouched beside a pile of organic material, I let myself study the viscera that remained of a human torso. The edges of the gaping wounds were sharply cut. My eyes traced over the slashed flesh to the arcing splatters of dried blood, following the pattern backward and rebuilding the scene in my mind. I moved from one chunk of gore to another, careful to touch nothing. Slowly and deliberately, I lost all track of time as I pieced together the horrific puzzle. Eventually, I stood and brushed aside a system notification for a skill increase in forensics. As I turned toward the door, a glimmer of reflected light caught my eye. A framed holograph, splashed with blood, was centered on a bookshelf filled with knickknacks. I picked it up and wiped the glass covering. Crusted flakes fell free and revealed an image that made my breath catch in my throat. The 6 smiling faces in the image were a jarringly bright reflection of the agonizing jigsaw assembled in my mind. A family, as much as anyone had these days after the system apocalypse, with parents caring for children not their own, and children clinging lovingly to adults with no blood relation. After replacing the holograph on the shelf, I absently pulled a flask from my inventory and took a long pull. I should have felt more for the family. Anger that their lives had been stolen, rage at the potential snuffed out, a passion to bring their killer to justice. Instead, I felt nothing, not even the burn of the whiskey pouring down my throat. My system-enhanced constitution easily resisted weaker poisons and dulled any sensation the alcohol may have once given me. Though I had no proof, I suspected the system similarly affected mental resilience, blunting the horrific impact of how many humans had died in the previous 10 months. Despite the tragedy, people had simply moved on with their lives. Most even calmly accepted the arrival of the Galactics, aliens from throughout the wider system universe, as they settled in on Earth. In most places, these new arrivals promptly took over. I was currently in one such location, a true NR-owned village in what used to be western Pennsylvania. When I'd crossed into the town limits, I'd picked up a system-generated quest to track down a killer menacing the human population. The few local law enforcement officers left alive had apparently been unable to catch this killer. While the identity of any criminal could be purchased from the system, that criminal could also have class skills or spells that would assist in hiding them. The cost to purchase the identity from the shop would increase with each obfuscating ability added, quickly making the price prohibitively high. It often worked out cheaper to hire or post a quest for someone to hunt down the criminals who took these precautions, which led to adventurers picking up gigs as bounty hunters. Turning my focus back to the room, I closed my eyes and cast a newly acquired class skill. The nauseating aroma of the room assaulted my nose as blood scent settled into place. 6 distinct tangy bouquets hung heavily tangled in the air, and I spent several minutes locking each one into my memory. I wasted no time looking for the scent of the killer, since no evidence had been found at any of the earlier crime scenes, and I expected the same again here. I cracked my eyes open and left the room, but stopped where the 2 police officers waited. The younger man, sweating and pallid, stood behind his partner and looked anywhere but through the apartment door. Both noticed the flask still in my hand, neither able to hide their disdain. System information. Officer Robert Richardson, Level 36 Guardian, HP 960/960. Officer Thomas Cook, Level 11 Guardian, HP 280/280. 6 dead, I said, addressing the more experienced officer. 3 adults, 2 teenagers and 1 toddler, 2 days ago. That matches the apartment registration, Officer Richardson replied stoically. And the last time anyone talked to the occupants. No one heard anything? I asked. No, Richardson said, his eye distant. No one heard a thing. The killer disabled them all quickly, I said. Then he took his time cutting them apart bit by bit. The others were forced to watch. The rookie cub looked as if he was about to be sick again. The killer? Richardson peered at me sharply. Not a monster. Oh, it was a monster, I replied. Just not a system-spawned one. Your killer is human. Leaving the 2 astounded cops, I headed down the hall toward the stairs. Maybe it was a leap to claim the culprit was human, but my gut was convinced. This building was a safe zone, so no system monster could have spawned inside the room. The Galactics who ruled this town had no issues striking down a human in cold blood, but none of them had any reason to hide it behind closed doors. Just the opposite, in fact. Any killings were usually public examples being made of criminals, troublemakers, or those who violently resisted galactic rule. Most humans were second-class citizens, if they mattered at all, so no galactic would go through the trouble to cover up a series of murders. On top of that, most galactics now on Earth were so highly leveled that they would gain little, if any, experience from killing low-level humans. Only a human would have felt the need to hide these massacres from their own kind, especially murders performed in a place like this, an apartment building converted from a pre-system hotel in the middle of a safe zone, a home where the most vulnerable, those without combat classes, were meant to be protected. Instead, the people here were terrified, knowing a killer lurked in the night and anyone could be next. I was certain the culprit fed on the desperate atmosphere, relishing the terror his work left behind. More than the deaths of the family, this annoyed me. That a predator could feel superior in stalking the weak and helpless left me feeling raw. Despite my antisocial tendencies, I still regarded humanity as my own. I felt a primal need to deal with that which threatened my people. The Galactics were outside of my capabilities for now, though that was an itch I looked forward to scratching. Once outside on the sidewalk, I took a deep breath of the fresh evening air. Blood scent remained active, slowly draining my mana and allowing me to follow the faint coppery tang. The sun had dropped below the horizon, but enough light remained for me to get my bearings in this unfamiliar small town. Other than pursuing system-generated quests or bounties for broken galactic contracts, I spent the majority of my time alone, grinding out levels in the wilderness and occasionally partying up with other adventurers to clear the odd dungeon or 2. I had passed through here before, but the few surviving rural burgs throughout this part of the country sort of blended together at this point. So, you're the latest to pick up the quest for our town's little murder mystery, said a voice from behind me. I looked back at the man who leaned casually against the building, beside the door I had just exited. I raised an eyebrow in response, looking him over as he examined me. The man wore civilian clothes, a beige trench coat over a light blue collared shirt and khaki pants. He was shorter than average and slightly balding, which told me the man was either too proud or too broke to purchase genome treatment from the shop. An examination of his system status revealed his class and indicated the latter. System information. Scott Davis, Level 7 Journalist, HP 140/140. Latest? I asked. Adventurers passing through, like you, Scott replied. They all disappeared shortly after beginning their investigations, though. Is that a threat? I growled. My eyes narrowed as I turned to face the man completely. No, not at all, the journalist replied hurriedly. I just wanted to warn you that whatever is doing the killing doesn't seem to want anyone investigating too deeply. And a journalist doesn't investigate? I asked. I report the facts, Scott said defensively. It's common knowledge. Once the police publish their reports, at least for the bodies found in town. So there are also bodies found outside of town. The journalist looked around nervously, then nodded. Back when the system first came online, the town hunters would find convoys that had been slaughtered outside the town limits. People headed here for safety, but never made it. Or roadways covered in blood, with the area all torn up, but no bodies. Everyone thought monsters did it, but then the killing started in town. This almost sounds like the work of a system-enhanced serial killer, I speculated. What's the body count from in town? Nobody is really sure, Scott replied with a shrug. The numbers really climbed after families started showing up as victims, so at least 50 have been confirmed. But with the number of transients and adventurers passing through, on top of the killings outside of town, it could easily be hundreds. The ominous bits of news were troubling, since the system quest had made no mention of anything outside the town, or that the body count was so high. If the killer had been active since the system came online, the experience they'd accrued would be sizable, and would have led to the killer obtaining higher levels than normal. Why has no one bought the killer's identity from the shop if things are this bad? I asked. It's too expensive, Scott replied. No one can afford it on their own, and every time people try to pool their resources to buy it, the price jumps. That was really bad news. It meant the killer was inside the community and was able to take precautions. That's really all the info I've got for you. I hope it helps. The journalist turned and walked away. After a few steps, he turned back toward me. Good luck, he said with a solemn nod. The journalist had given me plenty to think about. That the man had been waiting for me outside the latest crime scene meant that word was spreading that a new adventurer was looking into the killings. As plugged into the community as the killers seemed, they would soon be aware that I was hunting. I headed south, tracking the faint aroma of blood that the killer had left behind. With dusk setting in, most of the local businesses along Main Street were closing up as I passed. The shop sold locally made goods using resources looted from system-spawned monsters. The human craftsmen making those items were still fairly low-leveled, so the system shops generally had higher quality, and thus more expensive, goods. The likelihood of finding upgrades for my gear was slim, though, so I passed the stores without a glance. Most of my attention remained focused on following the scent, but I was well aware of a few townsfolk eyeing me nervously and giving me a wide berth. As I reached the southern edge of the business district, the storefronts of the downtown area gave way to residential homes. I also felt the onset of a headache caused by low mana and quickly cut off blood scent before mana fatigue could fully set in. The conversation with the journalist had taken longer than I would have liked, and leaving the class skill active during that chat had drained my mana. I would have to let my mana regenerate before I could continue my hunt. A downside of the physical benefits of my class was that I tended to be far weaker on the spell-casting side of things. No longer focused on my class skill and intently following my nose, I became aware of the music that emanated from a solid brick building ahead of me. Live music tended to be somewhat rare, since musicians had generally fared poorly in surviving the apocalypse. The full sound of a stringed instrument pulled at me, and I found myself walking several steps toward the building. I forced myself to stop, disconcerted that the unexpected music had attracted me so strongly. Mental influence resisted. The conscious mental effort and notification explained the powerful draw and aroused my curiosity. I had fairly significant mental resistances, so a musician who could challenge them with a compulsion certainly seemed worth checking out. Now that I was somewhat closer, I gave the building a more thorough examination. It looked like a pre-system dive bar, only somewhat cleaned up by new management. Galactic runes above the door proudly proclaimed 𝗤𝒵𝒻𝒄𝒃 ownership and that adventurers of all types were welcome. 𝗤𝒵𝒊𝒂𝒊𝒍𝒕𝒐𝒏 were like dwarves from fantasy legends, except that their craftsmen were no more talented than anyone else in the system universe. Hard drinking and hard fighting, they were often seen as honorable mercenaries. So long as no one avoided insult to a 𝗤𝒵𝒊𝒂𝒊𝒍𝒕 clan, beard or axe, they tended to be fairly good-natured. I stepped into the building and found every eye in the place glancing in my direction as I eased the door closed. I was pretty confident of what they were seeing. Some used high charisma to enhance their looks. I used my charisma to ensure others saw exactly what I wanted them to see. A tall, brown-haired human man with a muscular build wearing a dark gray combat jumpsuit. A sword sheathed across my back and holstered pistols on both hips. Standard adventurer chic. Nothing out of the ordinary. System information. Hal Mason, level 29 hunter. HP, 220/220. A granite-top bar counter ran along one side of the room. Surprisingly, the bar top looked to be at a normal height for a bar, despite the older, gray-bearded 𝗤𝒵𝒊𝒂𝒊𝒍𝒕 tending bar from behind it. The bartender conversed with a group of 𝗤𝒵𝒊𝒂𝒊𝒍𝒕 taking up about half the high stools at the closer end of the bar. Behind the bartender, above the racks of liquor, hung a massive double-headed battle axe. From the notches and scrapes on the weapon, I could tell the axe had been well used. Several tables of a cart of mercenaries promptly ignored me, going back to a complicated series of card games. The green-skinned aliens were similar in appearance to fantasy orcs, but I prefer to think of them as high-tech super soldiers. The 𝗥𝗿𝗶𝒁 typically operated in well-disciplined squads, so if you saw one out in the wild, there were probably several others nearby, keeping you in their sights. A group of 𝗥𝗏 took up a large table in the far back of the bar, out of the way. The 9-foot-tall minotaurs were thick with muscle and commonly employed as adventurers. I recognized none from this particular group, but I had worked with the 𝗥𝗏 in the past and found them more than capable. The rest of the clientele scattered throughout the bar was a mix of human and 𝗔𝗏. Nothing about the humans stood out, exactly the shady types of people I would expect to find in a seedy dive bar. The 𝗔𝗏, on the other hand, were eye-catching. Dark elves with lithe figures, midnight black skin, and exotic hair colors, they moved with ethereal grace. 𝗔𝗏 politics followed a labyrinthine feudal system I barely grasped enough of to know that Earth fell just inside their galactic territory. Like this town, large portions of North America were now also under direct 𝗔𝗏 control. Across the room from the bar, an elevated platform served as the stage for a 𝗔𝗏 woman vigorously playing a stringed instrument similar to violin. As captivating as the music had sounded outside, I found the instrumentalist dancing across the stage even more mesmerizing. The silver corseted dress hugged the woman's slender, athletic frame and sharply offset the onyx skin of her bare shoulders. Her shapely legs flashed through slits in the dress as she spun, kicked, and twisted around the platform. Platinum hair dyed in waves of cerulean and crimson streamed behind her as she danced with her eyes closed, lost in the enchantment of her own musical creation. Pulling away from the enthralling vision on the stage, I headed to the empty end of the bar and perched on one of the high stools. Walking along a ledge on the backside of the bar, which kept them at a normal height, the 𝗤𝒵𝒊𝒂𝒊𝒍𝒕 headed toward me. "What'll it be, lad?" "Whiskey," I replied. "Neat." The dwarf grabbed an empty tumbler from a rack behind the bar and poured in a generous quantity of amber liquid from a recognizable green-tinted bottle. Sliding the glass toward me across the bar, he held up several fingers, and I transferred over the requested number of credits, as well as a small tip. The dwarf nodded in acknowledgement and headed back to the other end of the bar. Glancing at my status, I saw that my nearly empty mana pool had barely begun regenerating. Making a mental note to put more points into willpower, I resigned myself to waiting until my mana refilled. "Well, well, you're certainly an interesting human, Harold Mason." The sultry voice from behind tingled down my spine, and the use of my full name sent adrenaline rushing through my system. Twisting around on the bar stool, I instinctively dropped my right hand to the pistol on my hip as I found myself facing the musician from the stage. System information. Diana Baloisa. Unknown. Level unknown. Sultana of the Whispering Strings. Mistress of Shadows. unknown. HP, unknown. Up close, I found her even more stunning, and her loveliness momentarily arrested my panic at the realization that she had likely read my full system status. I'd barely glanced at her before luminous amethyst eyes captured my attention completely. Caught by surprise, I vaguely felt a sense of being analyzed and mentally stripped bare. I forced myself to blink rapidly and shifted my gaze away from her sharp, angular face, breaking the spell. Mental influence resisted. "That was rude," I growled, now on guard as I looked back at her. "Oh, I'm sorry," 𝗧𝒐𝒧🐓 replied, her skin flushed as she blinked innocently. "I forget how easily my influence overwhelms most humans." Despite my initial reaction, her response struck me. Maybe her influence still affected me, but my intuition told me that her words sounded genuine. She appeared as ageless as most 𝗔𝒂𝒊𝒂𝒊𝒍𝒕𝒐𝒏, yet I got the sense that this woman was younger than I would have expected. "May I join you?" she asked politely. "Sure," I said, as I released my right hand from the holstered pistol and waved at the bar stool beside me. 𝗧𝒐𝒧🐓 gestured to the bartender, who brought over a recognizable cocktail as she gracefully slid onto the stool. "You drink Manhattans?" I asked incredulously as I turned back to my drink. "It's a recently acquired taste," she said defensively. "Pity about the city." I snorted. "Pity about most of our cities." She looked at me with her eyes narrowed. "You don't actually care, do you?" No accusation tainted her tone. No judgment. Just observation. I sipped my drink while I considered my response. "No, not really. Nothing can change what happened, so there's no point in feeling upset. And yet, I feel the need to do something about it, to protect what little is left." I knew she was getting me to open up more than I should, but I was always a sucker for a pretty face. "So, what's a high-class dame like you doing on a dive like this?" 𝗧𝒐𝒧🐓's lips quirked into a slight smirk, acknowledgement that she was well aware of my attempt to change the subject away from myself. "Checking out all of the opportunities a new dungeon world offers. There are plenty of possibilities in a place like this for those seeking fame and fortune." "Sure, but you don't strike me as someone lacking in either," I said. 𝗧𝒧🐓 flinched and turned her head to look at me sharply. I'd struck a nerve. "No, but sometimes accomplishments gained by others leave one wondering what can be achieved on their own without depending on others for protection." I nodded in sympathy for the young 𝗔𝒂𝒊𝒂𝒊𝒑. Alone in the wilderness, reliant on only my own abilities to survive and eliminate system-spawn monsters, I felt invigorated. The chaos of combat banished the numbness and emotionlessness that had ruled me ever since the system initialized. Out in the untamed wilds, I fought to become stronger. If she desired to get out from under someone's thumb, building her strength on a dungeon world was certainly one way to do it. "Sometimes the most freedom comes when there are no strings to catch you if you fall," I replied. "Exactly!" 𝗧𝒧𝒐𝒧🐓 exclaimed, then sobered. "But my family doesn't see things that way." The young woman stayed silent for a minute. I waited. She would either choose to continue and open up more, or not. "I'm just a pawn to marry off," 𝗧𝒧𝒐𝒧🐓 said as she stirred her drink. "I won't be free to be my own person. Bundled off into an arranged marriage with another house, I'll be safely tied up with responsibilities and obligations." "Maybe your family is right," I warned with a shrug. "On your own is a dangerous way to live." "That's the only way to thrive under the system," she countered emphatically. "And so I ran away." "It doesn't tend to work out for everyone, though. What's stopping your family from tracking you down?" "Nothing," 𝗧𝒧𝒐𝒧🐓 sighed. "I'm sure they already know where I am. They just have to send someone to get me, and I'm not strong enough to stop them. Galactic society respects the strong." She turned half toward me, her look analytical. "The strong and the resourceful." "I've been lucky," I shrugged. At this point, we both knew she could easily read my system status despite my pretended nonchalance. "What if I said I'm interested in hiring you?" "I'd be skeptical of what someone your level would need of someone as low-leveled as me," I replied. Besides, I'm currently on a job. Diana looked away as she fidgeted with her drink. The sense of youth was back, along with a hint of vulnerability and a whiff of desperation. That quest hasn't gone so well for anyone else. So I've heard. Fortunately, I'm not just anyone. But why do you care? I'll tell you if you take the job, she shot back. I guarantee that I can pay more than you'd make collecting on contract breakers or crime-solving anywhere on this planet. Clearly, Diana knew that bounty collection on individuals who broke their system-enforced contracts was a lucrative business and my primary source of credits. My current income was higher than average, and one reason I still lived when so many others lay fallen. If she had access to the kind of resources necessary to research me with little more than a glance, her job offer would be interesting and likely worth my while. More credits meant I could afford more, and better skills and equipment from the shop. Tell you what, I said. Look me up after I finish this quest. If you're really offering that many credits, I'm interested. Good, Diana said. I'll be in touch. With that, Diana threw back the rest of her drink and returned her cocktail glass to the counter as she slipped off the bar stool. She glided back to the stage and quickly returned to her melodic performance. The position Diana offered would likely involve me heavily in 𝗬𝗏 politics. Once finished with this job, I needed to research 𝗬𝗏 society. My lack of knowledge would be a significant handicap if I ended up working directly for a 𝗬𝗏 noble, especially with the cutthroat politics her family history implied. I had little doubt she was far more than a minstrel. I shelved that train of thought and lost myself to the music flowing from the stage, helped along by a few more of the bartender's generously poured rounds. Eventually, I checked my status to find my mana pool nearly full. I finished my last drink and nodded respectfully to the 𝗵𝒆 bartender as I stood to leave. It was time to get back to work. Back outside the dive bar, I reactivated blood scent and once again followed the faint trail south. Night had fallen completely, the darkness broken only by sparse streetlights and the occasional storefront sign. The streets were deserted, not a person to be seen. I followed the scent traces, the footsteps of my armored boots the only sound in the stillness. The scent soon cut through the main thoroughfare, then turned back south, still following the sidewalk along Main Street. Before long, I passed through the downtown area and found myself across the street from the hotel where I'd begun tracking the killer. The trail continued north, and my gut told me the end of the trail was nearby. I followed the scent for another half-block before the trail cut back across Main Street and west down an alley, between an old theater and a store built of weathered brick. At the end of the alley, I found a small parking lot bordering the backside of several buildings. The trail crossed the parking lot and led to the back door of a narrow 2-story house. I stood in the middle of the dark parking lot and stared at that door for several minutes. I then turned toward the back of another building that bordered this small parking lot. The beige brick building that had been my first stop in town after I'd accepted the quest to hunt down the killer. It was the old pre-system municipal building, which currently served as the police headquarters. I was unsurprised when a shadow detached from the building and glided toward me. The figure stopped a dozen paces away. I knew who it was long before the figure came to a halt. Human, levels above average, and able to wander leisurely around town after making any kill. "Officer Richardson," I said. The police officer, still in his uniform, cocked his head and examined me. "How did you follow the trail? No one else has ever come anywhere close to figuring it out." "Easy," I replied. "I just follow my nose." "Impossible," Richardson said, his brow furrowed in confusion. "I cast a cleanse spell. There was nothing of me to scent." "Sure," I said with a triumphant smirk. "But you cast it while you were still in a small room reeking with the blood of your victims. I follow their scent, which clung to you as you left." "Wow," said Richardson, his eyes wide. "I'll have to remember that the next time." "There won't be a next time," I growled. "Sure," he replied, as he gestured to cast a spell at the surrounding area. Despite the spell not being cast directly at me, I identified it as some kind of area silencing ability. The spell prevented any noise from escaping the area. Clearly how the killer had kept anyone from interrupting his killing sprees. Long knives shimmered into existence in Richardson's hands. As the weapons appeared, I pulled a pistol from each of my thigh holsters. The comfortable weight of system-upgraded Colt M1911, magazine loaded with handcrafted ammunition in .45 caliber, filled my right hand. My left carried a sleek, lightweight beam pistol constructed of galactic composite materials, the popular silversmith Mark II. Richardson charged toward me with a speed that defied belief. Just as quickly, I opened fire. The beam from my silversmith hit a shield before reaching the advancing officer, and the rounds from my M1911 sparked off the same shield as they were deflected. The shield flickered as I fired my fourth round from the Colt, and it dropped completely on the fifth, but Richardson was now within arm's length. I tried to step backward as he swung, but momentum was on his side, and I was forced to deflect his blades with the barrels of my pistols before I could get out of range. The upgraded materials in the Colt held up to the blow, but the other knife sheared completely through the silversmith. I hurled the sparking mass of severed electronics at Richardson, but he ducked under the throw. The officer's dodge gave me time to fire several more shots from the Colt. Each round took small chunks from his health. Then the slide locked back on the handgun, the magazine empty. A downside of the physical ammunition fired by the high-powered weapon was the magazine only carried 7 rounds with an additional one in the chamber. The advantage of handcrafted ammunition was that each round could be given bonuses by the crafter, which provided significantly higher damage than any mass-produced ammunition. In this case, my first magazine had been filled with rounds designed to break energy shields. I summoned a magazine from my inventory as I reversed direction and twisted in an attempt to get past the Russian cop. A line of fire ripped through the back of my left thigh as Richardson caught my leg with one of his knives. Hamstrung, you have received a debilitating blow to your left leg. You will not be able to run on your left leg until you are healed. I managed to finish the reload on the Colt despite the crippling pain in my leg. With my mobility severely limited, Richardson was all over me within a moment, and his knives tore through my defenses. My status became a mess of debuffs and damage notifications. Stunned. You will not be able to move, use mana, or react in any way while stunned. You are stunned for 4.3 seconds. Disarmed. Your weapon has been removed from your grip. You will need to pick it up or equip a new weapon. Bleeding. You have received a bleeding debuff. You will lose health so long as the wounds are not treated. -2 health per second. Richardson swept a leg through mine, which collapsed me onto the pavement on my back. I lay unable to move as the stun debuff ticked down ever so slowly. I looked at the killer above me as Richardson stared into empty space just above my head. I realized he watched my health bar as my nearly empty health pool drained from the bleeding effect. "Why?" I asked. "Why did you kill all those people?" "Because I could," Richardson sneered. "They were weak, and this is a world where only the strong survive." "I don't believe that," I replied quietly. "You're a monster." "You're a monster too," Richardson said gloatingly. "You care nothing but for the thrill of the hunt, and you're too weak to survive, just like everyone I've killed. That's why you're about to die." Maybe he was right to call me a monster, but I felt almost disappointed by the trite explanation. I thought a killer with such a body count would have a better excuse, even if only a deluded one. As the last of the health points disappeared from my visible health pool, I remained absolutely still and held my breath. This was my favorite part of the hunt, when the monsters sensed victory and I got to snatch it from their grasp. Richardson still stared above me, fixated on my empty health pool as he waited for his experience notifications. Nothing appeared for him. Richardson's gaze flicked to me, then back up at the empty health pool. Confusion crossed his face when he looked back down at me again. This time, I blinked. "What?" The killer recoiled in surprise. I pushed myself to my feet with no sign of my earlier injuries. I activated the right tool for the job as I stood. The class skilled instantly pulled weapons from a dedicated inventory space and filled both of my thigh holsters with new pistols. equipped with a shoulder harness rigged with a pistol under each armpit. It materialized a pair of 𝗵𝒄𝒂𝒊𝒂𝒄𝒄 machine pistols, one in each hand. Confusion warred with surprise across Richardson's face as I kept my eyes locked on his. I relished his expression as I deactivated most components of my penultimate class skill, On the Hunt. With my true class and attributes no longer disguised by the system, my health bar snapped from empty to over 3/4 full. System information. Harold Hal Mason, level 29, Relentless Huntsman. HP, 710/930. Wide-eyed, Richardson stared at me as he gaped. He closed and opened his mouth several times as he attempted to say something. How? Maybe I am one, I grinned savagely. But I hunt monsters. I raised the MP5 case and squeezed the triggers of both automatics. Flame and thunder poured from each weapon. Normal recoil from fully automatic weapons would have been difficult to keep steady, but my system-enhanced strength was easily up to the challenge. Richardson attempted to dodge by diving to the side and rolling to escape the line of fire. Despite his attempt, my round stayed on target. The fire from my guns robbed Richardson of his momentum and knocked him prone. He stopped moving as my weapons ran dry. After only seconds of automatic fire, the 30-round magazines were empty. I stashed the weapons in my personal system armory, provided by the right tool for the job, and strode over to the broken body of the killer I had tracked through town. Richardson wore armor under his uniform, but the close-range fire of armor-piercing ammunition left his torso a shredded, bloody mess, and air wheezed from a punctured lung. Even with those injuries, he would recover if given enough time. Time I would not allow him. I summoned a Smith & Wesson Model 29, once claimed as the most powerful handgun in the world, from my inventory, and pointed the massive revolver at Richardson's head. The hammer clicked back as I pulled the double-action trigger and continued to squeeze. The .44 caliber Magnum round almost blew off the killer's head. I fired a second time, finishing the job. Notifications flooded my vision. I quickly flipped through them to confirm the quest completion for tracking down the town killer. I touched the corpse and pulled it into another system inventory space with the Meat Locker class skill. Never knowing when the next conflict might come, I took the time to pull the spent weapons from my inventory, checked them for damage, and reloaded them. I then picked up the pieces of my silversmith beam pistol, found my dropped Colt, and looted Richardson's daggers. With those items picked up, only the pooling blood splattered across the pavement remained as evidence of the fight that had taken place. I glanced around to ensure I'd left nothing behind, but I quickly noticed that I was no longer alone. Surrounding the parking lot, 𝗏𝗏 and the uniform of the town guard formed a perimeter that cut off any route out of the area. At the mouth of the alley waited a 𝗏𝗏 more finely dressed than the uniformed guards who stood behind him. The guards eyed me warily as I approached the finely dressed figure, which gave me time to examine the man. He had the typical tall, slender build of the 𝗏𝗏, though he somehow seemed softer than the guards and most other dark elves I had encountered. The elf also seemed younger even than Diana. He carried no weapons, clearly trusting the escort behind him for protection. System information. Lord Aradin Daxili. Unknown. Level, unknown. Baron of the Argent Sea. HP, 790/790. The noble's level and class were hidden, likely by class skill, but the meager health points hinted at his level being quite low. Especially low if he was the man who, I suspected, ruled this town. "Adventurer Mason," greeted the young dark elf in a high, nasally voice. "Lord Daxili," I replied politely. "Thank you for ridding my village of that menace," said Daxili, which confirmed that he indeed owned the town. "He was a drain on resources and lowered my village's value." "You knew he was the killer," Daxili sniffed. "Of course. I know what goes on in my village." "And you did nothing?" I asked, annoyed by his inaction in the face of lost human lives. "It was a human problem," the dark elf waved dismissively. "I leave human problems to humans." But now you've become a problem for me by breaking the peace in my village. I was seriously aggravated by his knowledge of the killer and his lack of action. That he now declared my action of taking out the killer as problematic made me debate whether to show this spoiled punk a real human problem. I kept my face blank, but something of my intent must have leaked out, because two of the guards stepped up beside the noble, their weapons half drawn. I examined the guards critically. I figured I could take the ones in front of me, along with the noble, but at least another half-dozen guards were somewhere behind me. They would call for assistance, and I would certainly not survive if the entire town guard were called in. Before the situation could escalate further, a figure materialized out of the alley's shadows. Hips swayed as the figure sauntered toward us, and I recognized the seductive silhouette of the musician from the bar. The sensuous dress from earlier had been exchanged for an armored jumpsuit, one of significantly higher quality than my own, but it still managed to give her slender figure mouth-watering appeal. Mental influence resisted. "Take it easy, boys," said Diana. The sultry voice grabbed the attention of everyone in the alley. As if hit between the eyes by a hammer, the wide-eyed Chirp noble seemed stunned. "Countess, I knew you were in town, but what are you doing here?" Fantastic. The spoiled noble had revealed my intentional employer as a ranked member of the 𝗬𝗏 peerage. Her comments in the bar made more sense now. I needed to be wary, or else I'd quickly become buried in 𝗬𝗏 politics. Unfortunately, my gut had the sneaking suspicion my caution was entirely too late. Diana gestured toward me and looked pointedly into my eyes as a prompt appeared before me. "Contract initiated between Diana Balawiza and Harold Mason. Do you accept? Yes or no?" "The huntsman works for me," Diana stated confidently while she stared at me intently and ignored the other noble. I got the hint. She just made me an offer I couldn't refuse. I accepted the prompt and resigned myself to working for the gorgeous elf in a deal that would clearly be in her favor. "Contract agreed upon by Diana Balawiza and Harold Mason. Further details? Yes or no?" I ignored the prompt and hoped for a chance later to read through the fine print. "What? Is this true?" the young noble demanded, finally recovering from being hit with the full force of Diana's charms. "Yes," I replied, though I found it safer to say as little as possible. "Fine," 𝗥𝗍𝒄𝒂𝒊𝒍𝒕𝒐𝒏 huffed. "I want you both out of my village. I rescind my hospitality, Countess." "We'll be gone before daylight." Diana turned to leave the alley. "Come on, adventurer Mason." I followed the woman and nodded to the town guards as I passed. I ignored the spoiled noble. The guards tracked me warily, likely aware that any violence would end poorly for all involved. Once we reached the main street at the end of the alley, Diana turned back toward me. "Is there anything you need in town before we leave?" "No. I only needed to finish the quest here, and that's done." "That was an impressive fight," she said. "I enjoyed how you toyed with him. It almost reminded me of court politics back home." "Speaking of politics," I said with an arched eyebrow. "Countess?" Diana shrugged dismissively. "It's just an honorific. My family's complicated, so I have no lands or responsibilities. I want to forge my own path and not have it dictated to me. And now I have you to help." A moment later, the woman climbed onto a sleekly armored motorcycle that materialized on the empty street in front of us. I summoned my bike from my inventory and mounted it beside her. "Help with what?" I asked. "Hunting monsters, of course," Diana replied with a wink. A helmet snapped up out of her collar and over her head. Tires squealed, her bike shot forward, and she quickly left me behind. Resigned, I kicked my bike into gear and followed the 𝗬𝗏 countess off into the night. Hunting monsters, indeed. System Information. Advanced Class, Relentless Huntsman. Relentless Huntsmen are elite combatants skilled at tenaciously pursuing bounty targets for capture or elimination. Class abilities: +1 per level in strength, +3 per level in agility and constitution, +2 per level in intelligence and charisma, +1 per level in perception and willpower, additional 2 free attributes per level, +60% mental resistance, +20% elemental resistance. Class skills. Blood scent. The Relentless Huntsman may select a scent present in the current environment and follow any object or individual to which that scent clings. Cost: 30 mana per minute. Meat Locker. The Relentless Huntsman now has access to an extra-dimensional storage location of 20 cubic feet. Only deceased bounty targets or creatures may be added to this location and must be touched to be willed inside. Mana regeneration reduced by 5 mana per minute permanently. The right tool for the job. The Relentless Huntsman now has access to an extra-dimensional storage location of 5 cubic feet. Items stored must be touched to be willed in and may only include weapons, armor, equipment, or supplies owned by the Relentless Huntsman. Any qualifying system-recognized item can be placed or removed from this inventory location if space allows. Cost: 5 mana per item. Implacable Endurance. Reduces stamina cost for physical exertion and activated physical abilities by 50%. Does not stack with other stamina reduction skills. Mana regeneration reduced by 25 mana per minute permanently. On the Hunt. The Relentless Huntsman has a reduced system presence and increased ability to disguise their visible titles, class, level, ability scores, and any status effects. Effectiveness is based on the user's skill level and charisma. Mana regeneration reduced by 15 mana per minute permanently.